Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Priscilla Chigariro. If you are new here, this is the story of my marriage. So if this is your first time, please go back and start from chapter 1, part 1, otherwise it won't make any sense at all. So I know a lot of you thought that the end of chapter 3 was the end of the story. I arrived in the US and everything was rosy afterwards, but no. It was not to be, sadly. There are actually 3 more episodes, including this one. Our story will conclude at chapter 5, where I will share with you guys where I am now, how things stand, etc. But there was drama when I arrived in the US and leading up to just a couple of months ago. So get yourself a snack, get a drink, and I will see you guys in a minute as we continue with this story. See you then. Our journey to the US was not perfect because we were traveling during COVID times. When we arrived in Ethiopia, we flew from Harare to Ethiopia. We were supposed to connect from there through Tel Aviv, and then we would land in Boston. But when we got to Ethiopia, we were told that our connecting flight had been canceled because the Tel Aviv airport had just been shut down. They had closed because of COVID and they were not letting any flights transit through there. So we were essentially stuck in Ethiopia for 2 days whilst they were looking for a flight for us that was coming to the US. And for me, I was terrified because I thought that if they didn't find us a flight, they would send us back to Zimbabwe, which would just be the biggest disaster ever. So I was on edge for those 2 days, and finally on the second day they called us, they put us in a hotel and everything, and they were giving us our meals and all of that. And finally on the second day they sent a car to get us, took us to the airport, and said that they had found us some seats on a flight that was going to Chicago. So I was like, you know what, I don't care. As long as we are landing in the United States, I will take a train, a bus, whatever it takes until I get to Boston. So we landed in Chicago after this long flight, and then we were in Chicago for the better part of a day, also trying to get a connecting flight to Boston because they were all full. It was just complete chaos. We managed to get one late in the evening, probably the late flight around 10 p.m. Finally landed in Boston. My sister, who lives in Florida, who has been living here in the US, had arranged for a friend of hers to pick us up from the airport and for us to be able to stay with her for a couple of days until we made alternative arrangements for accommodation. So her husband came and he picked us up, took us to their home. It was so amazing. Like, just after everything that I had been through. And this is like, besides the fear of being attacked and all of that, there were also just the basic things like being able to just take a shower, having electricity, just having enough food. Like, for the first time in a really long time, because obviously when I was in Zimbabwe, I was struggling financially. I was just basically managing to stay afloat, making sure that my daughter had everything that she needed, or like, she was my priority. So all the work that I was doing, money was going to her, and then I had all these legal fees, and then just like, you know, basic, like, lots of expenses. So things that you cut back on automatically are things like, you know, food, like luxurious foods, you know, you just stick to the basics. So being here and eating how I wanted, actually sleeping and resting and being able to just, you know, just have Wi-Fi, just very, very basic things. It felt like heaven for like the first day that I was here, because unfortunately, because we had spent those 2 days in Ethiopia, I didn't get to see my son as soon as we arrived. We arrived on Sunday night. I was supposed to see him Sunday during the day, but because of our late flight, I missed that appointment, and my ex obviously took advantage of this and whisked him to the Cape, which is a couple of hours from where I was, and put him in a camp, a boating camp, for a week. He was like, oh, he had pre-booked everything, he couldn't cancel it, etc. You know, I'm not important enough for him to cancel something. So for the first week that I was here, I did not see my son at all. But it was actually for me just as well, because I really needed to focus, because the trial started on the Tuesday. I had 1 day of preparation. I finally met my lawyer, this amazing woman who had done so much for me and my family. I met her on the Monday. We prepped, went through everything, and just basically kind of like finally, like this person that I had been talking to and never actually seen physically, you know, looking at them, it was just, you know, it was like one of those moments where you're just like, oh my God, you don't even understand how much you've done for me. So that was like an amazing day. And then our trial began. It went on for 3 days. The woman that I stayed with, she was so amazing. She drove me to court every day. She stayed there with me, listened to everything, and she was so supportive. It was just, I just felt so blessed. It was like such a difference from where I was coming from, that it touched me. So after the trial was complete, the judge reserved judgment and said that he would contact the lawyers as soon as the verdict was ready. My lawyer, after the trial was done, she contacted my ex's lawyer to make arrangements for when I would actually be able to see my son. What had been happening whilst my son and I were separated, my ex and his mother had been telling him all these bad things about me, that I had been arrested, you know, just basically trying to brainwash him so that he would be really scared of me and he would think that I was this really, really bad person. I knew this because a few times that I spoke to him on the phone, he kind of expressed that. He was like, oh, Papa said that you did this or you did that. And that was like when we were separated, one of the things that I had asked my lawyer was to try to get a therapist to see him, to sort of help him cope with this, but that had never happened because my ex had not agreed to it. So I was worried that he would be afraid of me when he finally saw me, and I was right. Like, we drove to the town that my ex was living in, and we met at a restaurant. When I saw him and he saw me, my son, he was literally like shaking. Like, I could see, like, I came towards him and he was shaking, like physically, like shaking like a leaf. I couldn't even like really touch him. I could tell that he was a bit scared. I just held his hand, and I just, you know, like, you know how you would greet like almost a stranger or someone that you haven't seen for a long time. It was hard for me. But then at the same time, because I had been separated from him as well for a long time, it had like this effect on me that I didn't even realize or recognize until I actually saw him. I had also emotionally distanced myself from him because it was too painful. You know, when you have a child and that child is taken from you or separated, you slowly, as time goes by, for you to be able to cope with the separation, you distance yourself emotionally. And the longer this goes on, the firmer, it's like a building, that wall that you build becomes firmer and firmer with time. And I could feel it. I could feel that I had put a wall between myself and him, because I didn't want to hurt. I didn't want to think about him. I didn't, like, it would have actually probably killed me if I had thought about him through all these years that I had gone without seeing him. And what made it worse was the brainwashing from my ex. So it was like two strangers sitting next to each other and just kind of looking at each other. It wasn't like my sister like completely bawled and wept and did the whole nine. I didn't even cry. I didn't do anything. I kind of just sat and looked at him, and he just looked at me, like, you know, asked me some questions. I brought him his favorite cereal. He loved Cerevita, and he remembered that. So like I just kind of wanted to find a point of connection with him, and I knew that that was one thing that he would never forget. He used to call it blue porridge because it came in blue packets. So I brought him that. He remembered that, and he asked me to like open it and make him some in the restaurant, which was great. So I just watched him eat. We talked a little bit, and I was only allowed to spend 2 hours with him on that day. And then after that, my ex kind of wouldn't let me see him like overnight for like the next, was like what, August, September. I wasn't allowed to have him overnight. I was only allowed to see him 3 times a week for like 2 hours at a time. He really kind of overplayed or took advantage of his position because he had had our son for longer, and because we were between proceedings, like it was not possible for me to go to another court and get an order to force him to let me see my son. I kind of just had to go with it until we got a verdict from the judge about the Hague petition. But this was taking the longest time. Like, and initially we thought it was going to be about 3 weeks and then he would give a ruling, but August came and went, and then September. And then in September, we started doing mediation with my ex to try to come to an agreement about custody, child support, you know, basically everything. Something that we were supposed to actually do at the very beginning of this entire separation. Instead of going through all of these hoops of like stealing this and stealing that, you know, you sit down like civilized people and you agree on how you're going to share time with the children, how you're going to share property, and who's going to support who if necessary, all of those kind of things. And initially for me, at the very beginning when we had separated, I wasn't even asking him for support because I had my own businesses that were fine, that were flourishing. So it wasn't an issue for me. He had said fine, he would give some support, and I said okay, that's cool. But I had no intention of living in Russia. So in Zimbabwe we had house. There was no need for me to get support or anything like that, like I said. So now we were back to where we should have actually started. The mediation also included my visits, my visitation schedule with my son. My ex was not interested in having visitation with our daughter because I actually forget the excuse that he used, but he just said that he wasn't ready. And I was just like, okay, you know what? You cannot force a person to be a parent if they don't want to be. So she just remained with me. She was not involved in any of the proceedings, and it was basically about time sharing with my son. He came up with absolutely every single excuse possible in the book. First, he said that my living conditions were not ideal. I was letting my son sleep on the same bed as me, etc., etc. Like, you know, just nitpicking. Oh, I wasn't making sure that he ate enough. You know, just like he attacked my being a mother to such a point that it actually, like, you know, with everything that had happened, like compounded together, this is like years of attacks and court documents with horrible claims about me. So like with every single thing that he would file, he would write all of these things about me that were supposedly true, very negative things about me as a parent, very negative things about me as a person, all made up just to try to strengthen his case. And he continued basically in that vein. During mediation, he would say stuff. And I actually said to my lawyer, you know what, I don't think this is gonna work. It's a waste of time, because he's still on that narrative. Like, he's still selling himself this idea, and he still thinks that, you know, people are going to buy that I am a bad mother, I don't know how to feed my child. It's like, I have a 2-year-old here with me who looks perfectly healthy. Why would I be able to take care of one child and not be able to take care of the other? So this continued, and then at the end of September, finally he had no excuse to not allow me to increase my visitation time and to include overnights with my son, because here they do insist that you begin the visitation slowly. You can start with a couple of hours a week, and then that increases to like 1 or 2 overnights a week, and then gradually it's supposed to increase until you have equal time. But he was just not having that. In October, he agreed to me having 4 overnights for the whole month. So that was like 2 days every 2 weeks. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I went through that, and on top of all that, when I arrived in the US, I obviously had nothing. I came with 2 suitcases, one for my daughter and one for myself. I did not bring a lot of clothes or anything like that, and because when I had left Russia, I hardly took anything with me. I had to basically start from scratch. Even my phone was terrible. I had gone to Zimbabwe with an iPhone which had been stolen somewhere along the way, and I ended up with this really, really awful phone. So when I got here, my sister who had been living here arranged for me to get a new phone. And then, because I was living about 45 minutes away from my ex, in order for me to be able to see my son, and in order for me to actually be able to have overnights or to see him more often, I needed to be able to drive to his school and pick him up from there, or to drive to my ex, etc. So not having a car was a serious disadvantage. So she also helped me to get a car here. In September, that was in September. So late September, he sent this email to the mediators and the lawyers, like really pissed off. Like, he had been acting like, since I had arrived in the US, he didn't react. Well, he didn't show me a reaction, but I knew obviously that he was like, number one, very shocked that I was here, and probably like very pissed, but did not want me to see it. So I think after he saw that I got a car, he was pissed. He was so angry. He wrote an email to the lawyers asking how it was possible that I had a new phone, that my daughter had a tablet, and that now I had a car. Like, what was going on when I was supposed to have no money? Can you imagine? Like, I will try to put a screenshot of the email in this over here. He was pissed. I laughed when I saw that. I was like, yes, good for you. And then October came. I was allowed to start having more overnights. I also moved to a different town to live with another lady who was the sister of the lady I'd been living with, because she needed some help with her kids, and I needed somewhere to stay, so it was a great exchange. I would drive like basically the hour to go to his school, see him after school, take him to activities, and then slowly integrated into his life and slowly got to know him some more. But it was always very challenging because I felt like my ex was using him to spy on me. So you would see like my son would ask me some questions that are just like, you know, out of the ordinary, and I'd ask him, you know, why are you asking that? And he's like, oh no, Papa asked me if this and that and the other. And then you would hear like during mediation, he would bring up things like, oh, I heard this and this happened in her house where she's living, etc. You know, just those small things, like to show that he was still trying to fight about everything. He just was not done. And for me, I was done. I was tired. I was exhausted. And what made me sad, like around this time, like a couple months later, I was looking at the first picture that I took of myself when I got this phone. And by then, you know, after like 2-3 months of just kind of being at peace, I looked at this picture and I was just like, oh my God, like, I will insert the picture, but I felt so sad. I felt so sad for myself. I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this is how I looked when I came here. I was so thin and I just looked so exhausted and just like insane. But anyway, I recovered. I spent more time with him as well in November. And in November, initially when we came here, we obviously came on tourist visas and we were supposed to leave. We were supposed to get the verdict, and whatever the verdict would be, it would either extend our stay or we would then return to Zimbabwe with my son. The longer I spent time here, the more I realized that it was in my best interest and in my children's best interest for me to push for us to remain here in the US. Number one, we would be so much safer. Number two, I would feel safer, and I would be in a place where I would be able to take care of my kids better, probably make more money, and things would just be better. And I wouldn't have to deal with all of the stress of being in Zimbabwe and the uncertainty, etc. So around November, I started kind of hoping, like together with my lawyer, we were like hoping I would lose my case. And the judge would say, no, stay in the US, or at least partially lose my case. Because the only important thing that we wanted the judge to ascertain and to agree with was that my son had been kidnapped from Russia and brought to the United States. So the petition, the Hague petition, had two parts to it. For you to win the petition, number one, you have to prove that your child has actually truly been kidnapped. And then number two, the judge has to determine to which country the child needs to be returned. And it has to be a country that has a treaty with the United States. So my son had been removed from Russia, and Russia had no treaty with the United States. So that's why I had applied from Zimbabwe, which has a treaty with the United States, asking for my son to be returned to Zimbabwe. So November came and still no verdict. We continued with the visitations. I think I probably was up to like 6 nights a month now with my son. Things were slightly better with him, but then not so much, because, you know, there was still always like, he was really torn, and I could tell. He didn't know how to behave towards me because he had this like person in his ear the whole time. And it wasn't just my ex, it was my ex and his mother, who now was acting like he was my son's mother, in his ear all the time, obviously telling him stuff and trying to maintain that emotional distance between him and I. So December came, and we split time in mediation. We discussed the coming holidays, and it was the Christmas holidays. And since I am Christian and I celebrate Christmas, my ex did not celebrate Christmas. He was Jewish. So he would spend time with our son at the beginning of Hanukkah, which is slightly prior to Christmas. And then I would spend time with my son on Christmas Day, and I think the day before or day after, like a couple of days over the Christmas holidays. And the break was basically only about 10 days. So on the 21st of December, out of the blue, the judge finally handed down his decision. That Monday, my son had spent the previous Sunday with me as an overnight, so I dropped him off at school on that Monday morning. And then around noon, my lawyer contacted me and told me that the judge had handed down his decision and she was forwarding it to me, the ruling. So I read the ruling, and thankfully, yes, the judge said that he agreed that my son had been wrongfully removed, basically kidnapped from Russia and brought to the United States. But unfortunately, he believed that Russia had been his habitual home at the time and not Zimbabwe, so he could not send him to Zimbabwe. And he obviously could not send him to Russia because there was no treaty agreement. So he didn't have a remedy for me in that regard. So we would have to have our custody proceedings happen in Massachusetts here. For me, this was perfect because I had the agreement of the judge that he was wrongfully removed, which would be great for me when it came to the custody hearing. And I got to stay in the United States. I had a very good reason to extend my visa, which would then at a later time allow me to change my status. My lawyer and I discussed our next steps on that date. And then that was Monday, the 21st. Then Tuesday, the 22nd, I was supposed to go and pick up my son from school in the afternoon and spend the afternoon with him because I spent Tuesdays in the afternoon with him, and then would drop him off at my ex's house at 5 o'clock. Around 2 o'clock, he finished school. I picked him up at 3:30 when I did pick him up from school. Around 2 o'clock, my lawyer suddenly called me. I wasn't at home when she called. I'd gone to a friend's house, which was about half an hour away. She asked me if I'd spoken to my ex that day. And I told her, yeah, I'd spoken to him. I hadn't spoken to him. We had just texted briefly. And then she said to me, could I please call my son's school and check if he was at school? And I was like, why? What's going on? Then she was like, she's got a bad feeling. I'm like, what are you talking about? The day that the judge had handed down the order, his ruling, the day before, Monday the 21st, my ex had gone to his lawyer. Remember, he filed a custody petition here in Massachusetts. So the second this ruling was handed down, it meant that this custody hearing, this custody case was now active again. So part of what happens when there is a custody issue between people, you cannot remove the children or the child, in this case, from the jurisdiction of the court. So he went on that Monday, he canceled this custody application that he had filed. And because the Hague petition was over and my son's passports had been held by his lawyer, he went to his lawyer, forced her to release my son's passports to him, canceled this custody case that he had filed. And then all of this information was only sent to my lawyer 24 hours later, the following day. So just before she called me, she had received all of this information. She had received the canceled custody application, and his lawyer had just informed her that, just so you know, she had released my son's passport into his custody as well, 24 hours prior. I was just like, oh my God, no. She was like to me, Priscilla, I have a bad feeling. Call the school now and check if your son is at school. I called the school. The school said that my ex had sent them an email that morning saying that my son wasn't coming to school because he was sick. I called my lawyer and I told her, and she was like to me, you know what, get into your car right now and drive to the family court. The family court was about 45 minutes away from where I was, and it was like now just after 2, court closes at 3:30. So I was going to get there around 3 o'clock. And she, in the meantime, she was in her office, and she was also like, she was about almost an hour away from the court. So she started typing out like all of these like applications. Like she was so fast. Like before it even dawned on me what was going on, she was already like typing out all of these, like already, like, you know, when you go to court for an emergency hearing, or when you apply for an emergency hearing, you need to type out your orders, like how you want the order to be structured, to include everything that you want. If it's in a case like this, you want the judge to order that the child is not removed from the state where you're in. You want to order like this, that, and the other. So she typed out all of those orders, and she was like to me, go to court, wait for me, tell them I'm coming, start filling out like some of the forms, and call me as soon as you get this so that I can tell you what to write, and I'm on my way. I will meet you there. I got in my car. I was like totally like, I was beside myself. I could not even like understand, you know, when you're just like, what the hell's going on? What is going on? I started trying to call my ex. He wasn't picking up. I started trying to call my son. His phone was now like disconnected, going straight to voicemail. I texted him everything. No one was responding, nothing, like radio silence. The one time that my ex responded to a WhatsApp, he said, oh, I'm driving, I'll message you later. And I was like, no, pick up my calls now. Like, where are you? What's going on? Where are you? Where is our son? He didn't respond. So I drove like mad. I like a crazy person. And like, I had my daughter with me. Can you imagine, like, this little person? I just grabbed her, left, drove 45 minutes. I was at the court just before 3 o'clock, parked, went inside, it was my first time there, didn't even know where to go, but then just like found a clerk's desk, asked them, they gave me the forms. I called my lawyer whilst she was driving. She told me everything to fill out so that I could start the filing process, to make sure because it would be an ex parte, like emergency hearing. So I handed these documents in, and she arrived just before 3:30. She arrived at 20 past 3, like with these documents that she had like printed and typed out really quickly, gave them to the clerk, and like kind of was like, no, we have to see the judge. Like, I've never seen anybody like, no, I'm not leaving, I'm seeing the judge today. And I was just standing there like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. The judge's clerk came out like at 3:30, and then he was like, you know, what is it? Like, you know, what's the urgency? And then she told him the history of like the previous kidnapping, etc. And she was like, no, this needs to happen now, because it's already been more than 24 hours since anybody spoke to this child or this person. We don't even know how far they could be by now. So he was like, okay, fine. We went, he took the documents into the judge. The judge agreed to see us, and that was like at like 3:40 p.m. Ordinarily, like, she would have closed her courtroom already, but then she was like, no, come inside. She listened, and then she was like, okay, it was an emergency. She issued the order. My lawyer had applied for emergency custody, like for me to be handed like full custody immediately, and for my ex to be ordered not to remove my son from Massachusetts, and for like any officer, like police officer who sees them, to stop them and to immediately take my son and bring him to me. So with this order, after the judge stamped it, and I drove to the town where my ex was living, which was like, everything here is very far apart. So it's like minimum 30-minute drive if you live outside of the city. So I drove like 45 minutes to my ex's town, and I went straight to the police station, gave them the order, and then they escorted me to my ex's house. When we got there, it was like already dark. This was already like around 6 p.m. We arrived, and they told me to park across the street because he lived across the street from a shopping center. The house was dark. Like, I saw like no lights, everything. And I was just like, okay, yeah, they're gone. But I just kind of, you know, I was calm. When the police went, it was like 2 cars that came. You know, they came and they parked, like flashed the lights at the house, like went with the torches to the windows and everything. And then they came back to me and they were like, the house is empty, there's nobody there. They asked me for my ex's number and I gave them. They tried to call him, he didn't pick up. I think his phone just went straight to voicemail. They asked me if I knew anybody else that he was connected to. I had his uncle's number, so I gave them, and then they contacted his uncle, and he said that he hadn't seen him. They did so much, like in a space of 30 minutes. I didn't even know my ex's number plate or whether or not, like, anything. They were like, okay, what's his name? They got like his name, everything, found all of his details, like car, everything, found that the car was registered in his mother's name. They put out like APBs or whatever, like spread all the information. Like in like 2 hours, a statewide alert had been issued to look out for their car. And at this point, like, you know, when you just don't know what to do, a friend of mine came and kind of sat with me and waited, like, whilst all of these things were going on. And then around 10 p.m. they were like, you know what, go home, there's no point kind of hanging around. Tomorrow a detective will be given the case and he will contact you and take it from there. I went home. I just couldn't, when you just feel like, Lord, I have just been through the most. It is like 2.5 years. 2 years I fought to get to my son the first time. This time I just thought to myself, there is no way he's ever going to let me find him. He has obviously learned from the first time how to do it. And this time he would take him to a place where I would never be able to get him, a place which would have no treaty with the United States, and I would never see him. Or it would just be another brand new battle of me having to leave here to go. It was just, if I even ever found them. Went home, didn't really sleep, just kind of was numb. I was just numb. The next day, my lawyer started working. She went back again to court to get a new order, a fresh order, now ordering him to return, because we were certain by this time that he had obviously left the state. So she got an order for him to return, a renewed, including the previous orders, which were that custody was supposed to be handed to me. Now she got an additional order barring him from leaving the United States, and if he had left the state of Massachusetts, for him to return immediately to Massachusetts and return my son. So this new order, and also she had included that we could deliver this order to him through any method, which would mean that WhatsApp, email, usually orders have to be handed to you, like, or served to you in person. But then, like, in a situation like this, the judge said, even if he sees it on WhatsApp and you have a read notification, like on WhatsApp, there's like the blue ticks to show that someone has seen your message. If you can get it to him on WhatsApp and he even opens it, it means that he's seen it. Or if you send it by email, and oh yes, the other thing he had done, he had fired his lawyer in Massachusetts to make sure that there's nothing, she couldn't accept service of anything on his behalf. And then he had directed my lawyer, like, after his lawyer contacted my lawyer, she said that she had renounced the agency, she was no longer his lawyer, and if my lawyer had any further things or any contact that she wanted, she must contact Alex Mambosasa in Zimbabwe. I was like, wow, we are back at that again. Anyway, so Alex Mambosasa was included as one of the people that would accept service on his behalf. So once we got this new order, and this was like now on Thursday, she sent it to me, and then she asked me if I had him on WhatsApp. And I had, but then he had blocked me. He had blocked me on my American number. And then I remembered that I still had my Zimbabwean phone, which I hadn't used in a long time. I sent it to him. And thankfully, he had obviously forgotten to block that number, because the message delivered and it blue ticked. And then he sent me back actually a message saying, please stop contacting my family because you're causing them distress for nothing. And then he immediately blocked me. But that message was below the order that I had sent him. So it proved that he had received the order. So I sent a screenshot of that to my lawyer. On that same day, a detective from the town where he lived was put on the case, and he started like a proper investigation and trying to contact him and stuff like that to find out where he was. So the fact that he had now received the order and he still did not return meant that he was defying a judge's orders. I was in a complete trance. Like, I was completely numb. I could not function. I could not do anything. Like, basically, physically, there was nothing I could do, and everything that could be done was being done by the authorities. My lawyer was working overtime. Like, she did not stop working. I felt like she only worked for me. Like, those days, she worked only for me. Like, she was on the phone with me. And she also started calling. She called the State Department, told them what happened, got them to start putting like blockades at all the borders, like to like send my son's information to all of the borders, like exit borders, like for the United States, everywhere, so that they would not be able to leave the United States through any borders. But then obviously there are some places, like there is one border in Canada which is not manned, and there's one, I think, in the south going to Mexico, which is also unmanned, or where you could possibly get through. And this was information that I got from friends, because they were like, oh my God, Priscilla, there's this border and there's that border. Like, you've got to, you know, tell them. Another thing as well that the State Department did, they checked if they had boarded any flights. This took about 3 days. They were yellow carded. That's what it's called. When you get yellow carded, they send an alert to every single airport in the world with my son's passport and my ex's passport, and they check if they've been on any flight in the past like 48 hours, or like they actually checked a week back. They had not been on any flights at all anywhere in the world. So like, I was baffled. I was like, okay, so where are they? This went on for several days, and Christmas came and went in between. The lady who I was living with hosted a Christmas party, and like 2 or 3 days after that, we all had COVID. So through the sweats and the illness, I still had to kind of go through all of this, still be alert when I received phone calls, because we were getting almost play-by-play updates now. Like, after about 8 days, the detective who was investigating the case called my ex, and then sent him texts that if he did not respond to him, he was going to contact the FBI. I think this scared my ex, because then he finally called him back. He called him back, and then he was like, oh, you know, he doesn't understand what the panic is about. Oh, he's not gone far. And he finally told him he was in Canada. And then the detective was like, okay, so why are you not letting his mother know where he is, and why are you not letting them speak to each other? Then he was like, oh, he never blocked that. He had told my lawyer, or he had told his lawyer, Alex Mambosasa, to contact my lawyer and tell her that if I wanted to speak to my son, I just had to contact Mambosasa and set up a schedule for when that could happen. The following day, it was actually December the 31st, I was finally allowed to speak to my son. I called, he told me that they were in Canada. He didn't even know what was going on. His dad had just told him that they were going on a holiday again. I told my lawyer all of this, and like, my ex had obviously been sitting with my son, like being careful, like getting him to watch what he said so that he wouldn't share in like more information. And also, he had actually refused to tell the detective where exactly he was in Canada, and he had refused to return. So he contacted the FBI, and then the FBI took over the case predominantly. They said that they would not look for him. They would wait for him to make a move, because eventually he would have to go somewhere. He would have to, he couldn't just stay in Canada forever. He would have to go somewhere. So they would wait for him. The judge had scheduled a hearing for January the 5th, where this whole new custody case would be heard, and he would have to appear in person, my ex. And also all of the orders she had now issued like a permanent order, like return to Massachusetts, etc., or it's like contempt basically. On January the 3rd, the FBI called my lawyer and told her that my ex had booked tickets. He had finally made his move. He had booked 3 tickets, one for himself, one for my son, and one for his mother, to England, to London. One-way tickets. He hadn't booked anything else beyond that. And they were like, that's brilliant, because now and he had booked them for January the 5th, which was the same day as the hearing. That was like, it was a relief and good news for me, because I finally felt like, okay, good, at least they kind of have a handle. They know which airport he's departing from. They know his route. So even if they were to miss him in Montreal and he were to still fly to London, the second he would land in England, he would be picked up there, because they had been yellow carded all over the world. They couldn't go anywhere. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I went to court. His lawyer, now who he rehired, appeared for him. And my lawyer and I were there. The judge asked her where he was, and then she was like, oh, he's on his way to Zimbabwe. I don't think I mentioned this, but I filed for custody in Zimbabwe for my son, because I needed a declarator which would support my Hague petition, because it would then kind of show what the rules as far as children born out of wedlock are in Zimbabwe. And children that are born out of wedlock in Zimbabwe, the mother automatically has custody of those children, unless of course you can prove that she's unfit in any way. So that is why I had filed that. But then Mambosasa had forgotten to respond to my custody petition in Zimbabwe, and he was out of time. He didn't file anything. So basically I was waiting, and I was going to get the default judgment anyway, because there was nothing on file that they had responded to my application. So fortunately, we knew this was an argument that they were going to use, because he had started, like, Mambosasa had now come into the picture saying, oh no, he's coming to Zimbabwe because there's this custody case that is pending in Zimbabwe. I asked my lawyers in Zimbabwe to get the docket, because from the High Court you can get a docket which says what has been filed, what proceedings have been filed for any particular case. And it will show the date it was filed and who filed it. So all it showed on the docket was that I had filed for custody. There had been no response, and then I had filed for a default judgment. Those were the only pleadings that were on file with the High Court. So we brought this with us, and we were like to the judge, obviously he's not going to Zimbabwe because he's going to arrive there and lose this case. This was January the 5th. She issued a final order giving me full custody of our son, and again ordering him to be returned to Massachusetts. Straight after that hearing, I guess his lawyer contacted him and told him what had happened. He still did not return. But that evening, he went to the airport with his mother and our son, checked in. As soon as they checked in, like already, when the FBI are looking for you, they send the marshals. The marshals are the ones that actually arrest you. They're the ones that sort of hunt you down. So the marshals were already waiting at the airport, waiting for him to arrive. When he checked in, they notified my lawyer. She called me. So we were basically getting, like, I was sitting there, like on the edge of my seat. I was just like, oh my God, like it was insane. It was like a movie. Like if you think any of this story was like a movie, this is when it got dramatic. I was on the edge of my seat. They checked in at 5 p.m. And, you know, I guess they follow you around the airport. And also, for something to be a crime, you actually have to, like, for it to be kidnapping or for crossing borders without permission or whatever it is they call it, you have to pass through immigration. So they watch you do all of these things and then they catch you on the other side once you've nicely committed your crime. So they followed them around the airport and then they went through immigration. And then they got to their boarding gate and they sat down. So the marshals were like, I guess they separate. And this was now my son who was telling me this afterwards. His grandmother was sitting like to the left, he was sitting in the middle, and my ex was sitting on the right, and they were by the boarding gate. I'm sure they probably told the flight attendants what was happening, so they delayed them boarding until quite a few of the other people that were on the same flight had got on. I think basically to create space. And then out of the blue, like when my son explained it to me, I was just like, oh my God, I would have paid anything to see this. But he told me that he was just physically, like, he just felt himself being lifted and he just did not, like, he didn't really see much. Like, he was picked up from the back. His grandmother was moved that way and my ex was just like slammed onto the ground, like in front of him. And like, he said that these agents just jumped on him and like they were yelling, on the ground, on the ground, on the ground. Like it was just crazy. Like, but then they quickly whisked him off, like took him somewhere else, took my ex into custody and told his mom to go away. It was it was just like insane. Like it was incredibly traumatic for my son and for me. Like at every moment they would call, like my lawyer called, she was like, okay, they have them in their sights, they're sitting there by the boarding gate, they're going to wait about 10 minutes and then they will take him. And then as soon as he was arrested, she called me, they've got him, they've got your son, everything. And then like for that night, my son was put in foster care in Montreal. He stayed with a family there, and the very next morning, I drove with a friend to the Canadian border. It's like really, really far, and it was now winter, it was snowing. So we drove up and we spent the night. So my son spent 2 nights in foster care. And then the following morning, we drove to the border, and the marshals and a woman from the foster care drove him to the border, and they handed him to me there. I was just like, I couldn't believe that I had him back. I couldn't believe it, that it was over.